All right, good morning. Let's get to our text today. The miracle of Jairus' daughter and the healing of the bleeding woman is a remarkable example of who Christ is and the compassion that he has and his ability to supersede the laws of nature, even of life and death. What I'd like to do is have us begin our study of this account in the book of Luke, chapter 9, chapter 8, beginning in verse 40. You with me? Luke 8, verse 40. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. And then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. No one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "No, somebody touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." And then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." And while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she'll be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She's not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. This is early in the ministry of Jesus, and him being the great physician was going to mean so much more than just the ability to physically heal people. And so time and time again, you'll see Jesus healing somebody and then saying, "Shh, don't tell anybody." What's amazing is it's the command of Jesus that was most ignored. Because it seems like the people that Jesus told not to tell anybody about what had happened went everywhere and told everyone about this Jesus from Galilee. Some people are just complacent about seeking God. Years and years go by, but sometimes it seems that people just never quite get it. They never quite fully understand the nature of discipleship, what it means to be sold out for Christ. Now, in our account in Luke chapter 8, and by the way, it's echoed in Matthew chapter 9 and Mark in chapter 5. It had been a busy day of miracles, and it begins with Jairus' daughter, who is deathly ill. Now, Jairus is just not somebody. He is a leader of the synagogue, and he is not like Nicodemus, who snuck to find Jesus in the middle of the night. No, this is in the middle of the hubbub. This is in the middle of everybody, the town square, that he finds Jesus and asks him to move quickly to his home because there was an emergency, and the emergency was that his daughter was gravely ill. And the Bible even says that she was 12 years old, just so young to be so sick. So Jesus agrees to go to Jairus' house, But the crowd makes it very, very difficult for Jesus to even pass through. It is a crush of humanity on the streets of Capernaum at this time. And as Jesus is making his way to Jairus' house, this was a 911 call. You got to get there. You got to get there fast. She's on life support. She's not going to make it unless you get there. And an interruption happens. Something out of nowhere. A woman who had been cursed with bleeding. And it's interesting, she had been cursed for 12 years. The same age as Jairus' daughter. Understand her lot. What did it actually mean that she was cursed with this bleeding? Number one, it meant that she could never go into the synagogue. She could never go into the temple, being ceremonially unclean. It also meant that she couldn't work. It also meant that the accompanying ailments that would come with this kind of bleeding would have drained her of all strength and appetite, all the things you need to survive. She had been wasting away, humiliated. But she was so sick. She was so sick that in the middle of everything, casting all of her modesty aside, she goes to Jesus and says, I need help. I can't say this in a pretty way. I need your help to heal me of this bleeding. The woman had an idea in her mind, and since Jesus was moving quickly and the crowd was so close, she took a chance and grabbed for the edge of the garment of Christ. But it wasn't just the edge, it was a tassel that was attached to the edge of the garment of Jesus. Jesus had tassels on his garments because he was a righteous, religious, Jewish male. In Numbers chapter 15, verses 37 through 40, we can see that this command had been given by God. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the garments, on the corners of your garments, with a blue cord on each tassel. You'll have these tassels to look at, so you will remember the commands of the Lord, that you may obey them and not prostitute yourself by going after the lusts of your own hearts and eyes. They will cause you to remember and obey my commandments, and you will be consecrated to your God. These tassels were normally worn by righteous Jewish men. Interesting, the idiom of the day didn't refer to them as tassels. It actually used the phrase wings. It were the wings on the edge of your garment. Remember Malachi in chapter 4? When it says that the Messiah would come with healing on his wings. Healing on his wings. Is what we have just read a fulfillment of that prophecy? Now, some later translations don't use the term wings. Actually, what is the word that they use? Healing in its rays. But I think wings is just as appropriate use of that Hebrew word. And so this Messiah would come with healing on his wings, in his wings, and this woman found that by touching a tassel that was on Christ. She was immediately healed, and Jesus knew it. She said, who touched me? Do you think Christ didn't know? Do you think Christ didn't know who touched him? Well, I don't know if he did or not. It's not impossible for me to believe the incarnate God, Jesus Christ, didn't even know who it was who touched him. The disciples thought this was kind of a dumb question because they said, well, you know, there's a crush of people. How in the world would he ever know who it is that actually touched you? Everybody denies that it was them. But finally the woman admits and tells what happened, and Jesus responds so kindly and so gently. He says, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be freed. Go in peace and be freed. So I've always wondered how Jairus must have felt about this interruption. This woman crawling on the ground, stopping Jesus in his tracks. And I don't have any reason to believe that Jairus wasn't a good person, but I'll tell you what, it could have been terrified. It would have been terrifying. When we lived in Oregon City, I was a very young man, and our daughter Alicia was little. I got a phone call that playing on Granddaddy's property at the time, she had been run over by a tractor wheel. I was, maybe 20, 30 blocks away, and a phone call like that gets you moving, and it gets you moving fast. I broke every legal speed limit in Oregon City to get there. Nothing would stop me. If a cop pulled behind me, he'd have to follow me there, because that's where I was going. It was an emergency, and my daughter's life could have been at stake. It turns out that it had rained and the ground was so wet. Even though she did get partially run over by this wheel, she just sunk in the mud, and she was okay. But I didn't know that. So Jairus must have felt similarly to this, that nothing is as important as Jesus and I getting to my daughter. Jesus says to Jairus to calm him down. He says, don't be afraid, just believe and she'll be healed. And it's Peter, James, and John that go with Jesus to the house. And there was a gathering outside the house of mourners and wailers. This is an odd custom of the Jews to hire people to mourn at funerals. In fact, according to the Talmud, even the poorest peasant was required at a funeral of a beloved one to hire at least 2 flute players and 1 wailer, professional wailer, to be there at the funeral. Jesus rebukes them, and he says, she's not dead. Don't worry about that. She's just asleep. And of course, they all laugh at Jesus, not seeing him as the Redeemer. And she goes to this little girl, and she says, little girl, arise. And she does arise. And Jesus not only sees that she's just been healed, brought back from the dead, but he also says, hey, I think she could use something to eat. And so he ordered them to produce some food so this little 12-year-old could have something to eat. I guess being dead really takes it out of you. But it's just such a wonderful story. And it brings me to a question that I want to ask, and it is this. What sort of people come to Jesus? What sort of people is it that come to Jesus? The first quality that we see in Jairus was an absolute convinced notion of the need. She was going to die. Nobody else could help. Jesus alone was the one who could help. Faith in Jesus is faith in the Messiah, for they are the same thing. Faith is what draws people. The notion that Jesus could be the very Son of God. Jairus had a need, but he also thought that Jesus could, in fact, heal his daughter. Not only was Jesus the Messiah, but Jesus is my Messiah. Jesus is her Messiah. I believe Jesus can actually do this. The woman with the flow of blood was convinced that Jesus was Messiah with healing in his wings. She was so convinced that she would crawl literally to Jesus to touch the tassel in the hope, the distant hope, the faint hope that she might be healed. And then after this, we talk about 2 blind men who are healed by Jesus, who refer to Christ as the Son of David. And this was a busy day of healing, a busy day. People who come to Jesus know these things. And people who come to Jesus are introduced by somebody who knows it. And that's us.